meeting to order. I know we have a few more that's going to hop on, so I'll wait to take roll here in a few minutes, but I would first action of business. First of all, welcome to everybody. Thanks again for taking time out of your day to join us this morning. Thanks to the staff and to the folks from Sunflower, Brandon and Krista. That'll be our main presenters today. And I'll say this at the end, that our meeting in May is scheduled for May 12th. I anticipate that will encourage people to be there in person for the May 12th meeting. So with that being said, I would ask for a motion to approve the minutes that were sent out to you.
This is Sandra. I'll make that motion.
Jason, I'll second.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion about the minutes from March? If not, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Unanimous on the approval. Chris, do you want to go ahead and start on the update? Again, I know Gary, I might just say this, he's getting something that says invalid link. So if you want to try to send again to Gary Hansen.
Yes, Pat, I can go ahead and get started, and we'll get that link resent to Gary. We've sent it, I think, a couple times, and we'll see if we can try to get that to him in another method. Or
okay,
He'll probably he may have to download an app, because I got that notice first off.
Okay.
But once you download the app, it opens up.
Okay, thank you for that. So just so you know, I will be splitting this time with Robert, because he's got a handful of issues that he wants to address as the board's counsel. But just as from the litigation perspective, we have a very brief update just to let you know we have received our third payment from the McKinsey settlement. It is very small. It is about $205,000. We also anticipate receiving the next payment from the J&J settlement sometime around July. That one will also be small. It'll be about $260,000. And we will receive a third, yes, it would actually technically be the third payment from the distributor settlement, which will be in the neighborhood of $8 million sometime this summer, which means we would have some additional funds to distribute from the Kansas Fights Addiction Fund to Sunflower for management purposes, probably by the start of Q3. We are making progress on the next round of settlements that had previously been announced. This is with Teva, Allergan, CVS, Walgreens, and Walmart. We don't have really any update on the status or payment expectations on those, but I will tell you that do not expect any kind of money flowing from those settlements until late Q3 or Q4 at the absolute earliest. A couple other minor points. One thing that we did request last month, and we've received one so far, we would request this again, is brief bios from the board members so we can get those uploaded to the website. We are doing a website reconfiguration, so we won't have all of the features on the current website that we're anticipating developing over the next year on the new website. But we would like to at least get bios for the board members. Thank you to the one board member who did send that, not calling anybody out by name. But we would like to get the rest of you to submit a bio to us. I think that is all I did have one actually other thing, and this is just a reminder about the way the statutory structure of the board's relationship to the AG's office, relationship to Sunflower kind of works. We had previously discussed this in the past, but just want to remind you that the way this structure works is that the AG's office has contracted with Sunflower through an MOU to serve the board, but we really are the primary contact with Sunflower. So we would ask to be a part of conversations about Sunflower's management of the grant program, grant funds, those things. We would like to be a part of any kind of conversation that any board member wants to have with Sunflower about those particular issues. And then I'll turn this over to Robert.
I've got one here. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I have kind of three things to talk about today. The first, Chris was pretty nice about this last time, but I will be a little less kind. I'm going to need to insist that board members use these secure AG email addresses that were given to them. If you're having a problem with them, please reach out to our IT. Connie, Chris, or I can provide that contact. There are lots of security and open records issues associated with using your personal email address for board business. If we ever get a core request, and I'm aware that you're using your personal email address, it's possible I would have to search your personal email to respond to those requests. And I don't want to do that, and you don't want me to do that. So please make a habit of using your issued board email addresses. Put a reminder in your calendar to check it every week or two if you need to. And if you have any questions about it, email Chris, myself, or Connie. We'll get you in touch with the right folks. That just needs to be the business going forward. It'll also make it really easy when terms come up or new people have to be appointed to hand off important information and means of communication. Yeah, and I mean, that's for kind of any communications related to board business should be going through that email. So if there's, group text or anything like that, I need to be made aware of that. And communications, again, particularly when we rise to a level of a quorum, must go through open meetings, and business should be conducted through emails when otherwise done.
Robert, in regards to that,
Yeah.
Is that, since we've had some problems with the email and people not getting them on the KFAB site, I've asked Connie on occasion to send to both, more or less as a reminder that people can go to, if there's any kind of response to that email, the response would be through the KFAB email. Is that okay to continue that practice?
If you have email, if you have board business in your personal email, you run the risk of opening your personal email to search in response to core requests. Even if it's a reminder, ideally there wouldn't be anything responsive in there, but the existence of board documents in your personal email and board communications opens that possibility up.
Okay.
So this is Jason, and I very much appreciate that. And I'll send a note, I guess, through Connie to make sure that somebody actually sends me something about that. I've never had any outreach since I joined the board about getting one of those emails set up. So if somebody could reach out and help me with that, that would be just fantastic.
Sure, I think we had asked David Fry to transfer the email information over to you, but we'll work on that.
Okay.
Connie and I will get that. The two of us will get that done within the next week.
This is Sandra. Can I ask one more clarifying question? Just so I'm aware, we started receiving meeting notices through our other email. Will that stop as of now, and everything will be just through KVAB?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I know. We'll work on that. Yeah, I just don't want to create an issue where lots of personal stuff is actually subject to examination, and again, it's easier for ultimate handoffs, especially given the lifetime of the board, and the expectation that other people will be sitting in the same seats. Again, for security and open records purposes, that just needs to be the method going forward.
This is Sarah. Robert, I appreciate that reminder, and I'll be the first one to tell you that I have my stuff sent to my city email. And honestly, anybody can read anything from my city email. Go, have a great time. But I get what you're saying. My concern is going to be that if I respect that you want us to check that email on a frequent basis, the reality of it is that if you need a fast turnaround on a vote, or if we're going to do anything that is time sensitive, I can't guarantee that. I mean, when you know, checking that on a really frequent basis may not be the reality for everybody.
I understand that, and the frequency is up to the board members. No board action can be taken outside of an open meeting anyway. So no
But then a
votes
call for a meeting, yeah.
yeah, I mean, a call can go out and a meeting can be set, but conducting board business can't happen by email. It has to happen in an open meeting anyway. So, I mean, like I said, every 1 to 2 weeks, if that's fine. We don't, at least, especially at this point where, no grant petitions are being reviewed or anything like that, there shouldn't be anything that requires, instant 1-day response.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Two other matters that are, I would say, good things, right? I sound less mean. Is last time I was asked to put together a conflict of interest statement or position, and I will send that out to the board in the next week. And I've actually built a confidentiality provision into it as well. That will give, and it'll be for your consideration and discussion at the next board meeting. But it'll give the board idea of what to do when there is a potential conflict of interest and what kind of action the board can take in response to being notified of a potential conflict of interest. So you'll have that guidance coming up, and we can discuss the particulars of that next time. The last thing is I had a meeting with Krista and Shanna from Sunflower and Chris regarding policies or guidelines for capital expenditures within grant applications. I had a lot of concerns with having a kind of flat open policy, especially when that got into property titling and trying to encumber future purchasers. So after a good and long conversation that also involved the fact that capital property management isn't something that Sunflower does as a part of its other grants, is developing a guideline that can be put out and issued to potential applicants for things that they should be considering, and noting that the board is authorized by statute to build special conditions into each grant award, where if there are special conditions needed for capital expenditures, we can look into it and build them into the award itself rather than having a flat, universally applicable policy. So that will be, that's something that we've worked on a draft for those guidelines that create a lot more flexibility for the board and avoid a lot of the potential legal issues that kind of the stricter elements of the first policy draft raised. If you have questions about that, we can make that an agenda item for a meeting about what capital expenditures would require and what kind of special conditions should be built into the grant awards. That's something that Chris and I would work on for the AG side, and also Sunflower would be involved in what those conditions are, and very importantly, how to supervise and monitor them. So if you have thoughts on that and concerns, definitely have those ready for next time, and we will be happy to talk through that a bit more.
And if I can just add some broader context to that point, I've talked with other states about how they're trying to handle capital expenditures. This is a complicated issue that no state really has a very secure, clear answer on. The only state that's even close is Colorado, and they have a dedicated infrastructure fund for capital expenditures, and they're still struggling with exactly the way they want to handle this. To Robert's point, this is probably not something we can do in a general policy, especially for this first set of RFPs.
So those are just kind of two FYIs in terms of conflict of interest policy and capital expenditure guidelines coming down the road. Have thoughts. If you have questions, feel free to send them to me, and we'll be happy to address those at the next open meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert and Chris. And so what I heard mainly, Robert, was that you guys are working on the policy. Gets a little dicey or complicated, and more will be revealed as we go along.
Yeah, we're working on a guideline that's just a little more open in structure, less specific in terms of what would have to be done every single time. It's more informative to applicants than something that creates binding action or binding rules for the board going forward, and gives flexibility. Will give flexibility to the board to adapt to each individual applicant on its specific needs.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Robert or Chris?
This is Sarah. I do have a question if I can go back to Chris. I'm wondering, is there a format that you want us to follow for that bio?
There's no strict format. Just a couple sentences is really all we need. Something that we can add to the website to just give the public a brief introduction as to who you are, what your qualifications are, or what your experiences are. This is really more about public transparency than historical record or anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no other questions, thank you very much, and we'll look forward to policy being developed around those capital expenditures as we go forward.
Pat, if I could, I'll just flag for you that I believe Gary and Robin are on the call as well now.
Okay, great. Well, let me just pause right there and just go through, just so we're know everybody on here. I'll just go down the list here. So Pat, George, I'm here. Sandra?
Here.
Robin?
Here.
Gary? Here. Lori, I know, is not here. Monica?
Here.
Sarah?
Here.
Mike Brower is not here. Mike Katie? Here. Keith? Haven't heard from Keith, and Jason is here, so yeah, capture all those, Connie?
Yes, she did.
Okay, well, we will just move right along to number 4 on the agenda. That's request for proposals update. The RFP, of course, has gone out, and I'll let Krista and Brandon tell you where we're at on it. And then the second part of that is the review process. And I know we've spent time in the past, and there's some slides that point to a kind of the standard process that Sunflower uses. And I believe that is the way that we want to go. We've had some conversation. The second was a hybrid where some of the members of the committee could be on that review process, and certainly don't want to cut anybody out, but just the time sensitivity and seem like all of us got plenty of things to keep us busy. And then if the board itself wanted to be the reviewers, and those are the 3 options with, and when we get through, Krista and Brandon can discuss those maybe in a little bit more detail, but I know we've spent time in the past, but I'll look to Robert, I guess, to see if we need to formalize that in the form of a vote. So with that being said, I will turn it over to Krista. Are you going first, or Brandon?
Yep, I'll start us off. And Robert gave us a head shake no that we may not need a vote on the review process. So FYI.
Okay.
Okay, so the request for proposal, so it went out, it opened on the 6th. The 2 press releases went out from the Office of the Attorney General. The first one went out on the 27th, and then the second one went out on February 27th, and then the second one went out on March 7th in the morning, announcing that the RFP was open. So they both were just kind of announcements, but then the second one had the links to the RFP and the additional information associated with that. And so those went out. And then I also sent emails to various stakeholders that we talked about in the past. And so I had that big long list of stakeholders, and the ones that you all added to and sent me contacts to, I also shared it with them and asked everyone to share with their networks. And so hopefully we got the word out. And I think we did also some social media on the Sunflower side as well to promote it as well. So that all happened. The confirmation of intent closed on the 30th, I think, March 30th. And we had 112 that came through officially. And then about 6 of them are probably not eligible. There was one in particular that I couldn't even tell if they were an organization. It looked like just somebody's name listed. And then the other ones looked like they were LLCs or other for-profits, so they're probably not eligible at this point. So that came down to 109. And then we've also had some emails that have come through that people missed the confirmation of intent deadline. We didn't require it, so they can still apply. And then we've also had some people register in our grant management system that didn't actually fill out a confirmation of intent. So we're up to 119 total, minus those 6 that are likely not eligible. And so we'll see what comes through with the applications after that. And some of those confirmation of intents are from the same organization that plan to apply for multiple different grants. And so there might be one organization that has 3 confirmation of intents. So just for reference there. We held both of our first 2 informational webinars on the treatment RFP, and the first one we had 80 participants. The second one we had 30. And we also have those recordings available as well. We listed the first one on the website, and then the second one was also on demand, but we didn't list both links. The second meeting, or the second webinar, didn't have any unique questions or anything, so we just kept one link on the website, but everyone that registered for that second webinar can still view that second webinar specifically as well, so it's available that way. In our grants management system, as of this morning, we have 54 of those entities that have registered into the grants management system. So that's separate from that confirmation of intent survey. They're actually in our system that they'll apply in. And then we have 27 of those that have actually started their application in some way or another. Most of them don't have a whole lot of information in there, but some of them do. And actually, yesterday or the day before, we got one completed application. So that was exciting to see that some progress there. And then I also did a breakdown by congressional districts. It looks like we have a good mix of all the congressional districts, so hopefully that won't be a barrier later when we're reviewing. Yeah, I think that's all I have on the update from how the first RFP is going. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Krista. Remind me of the congressional breakdown. It's not 25% each, but it's a certain percent that minimum.
1/8
Okay.
of whatever we spend in a year.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
I think we're all good. Thank you.
Okay.
Keep moving.
Keep on rolling. All right. So as Pat said, we wanted to present you some different options for the review process based on some past board discussions that we've heard. And so we're going to go ahead and start that off and present those 3 options. And Brandon's going to start by presenting the first option, which is what Sunflower typically goes through. So I'll pass the mic to him.
All right. Thanks, Krista. Good morning, board members. Thank you, Chair. So as Krista indicated, we're going to talk about some of the options available to the board as you consider the grant review process. I always like to remind the board that as a grant-making body, you represent one of the largest philanthropy-like entities in the state. So I do that because there are a lot of moving parts to making sure that a grant process moves forward from start to finish. And so the review process is certainly one of those big moving parts that you have to consider as you're moving through the process. Looking at the slide titled Sunflower Review Process. So this is the process that the Sunflower Foundation has typically used as it moves through an RFP process where we are taking in a large number of applications. So the 113 viable applications that we think we have at this point fits pretty square with the number of applications we typically are handling when the foundation puts forward an RFP. And so this slide really outlines what the review process that we typically have used to go through those applications. So to begin with, we always do a completeness review of the application right when it comes in. This process has also included probably a bullet before that, which is just reviewing organizations as they register in our system. And so we do that just to make sure that the organization is even a viable applicant, so that they're not necessarily wasting time filling out applications that they're not eligible for. So right now, we have already started that process as organizations register in our system, which is why we know how many are viable and how many aren't right now according to the RFP eligibility guidelines that the board has adopted. So then once we start receiving applications, we will do a review of whether or not we have all of the required components of that application. And then using Sunflower's process, we would begin assigning those applications to a team of reviewers that have been compiled to support the process. Those reviewers would then use a scoring rubric, much like the rubric that the board has already approved for this particular RFP. In most cases, our process would ensure that any one application is reviewed by at least 2 reviewers, so that we have kind of that dynamic between having multiple eyes on one application, because each scorer is really going to look at different things, and there's a lot of art to grant review as well as science, so that really takes into that piece as well. We typically use a combination of internal and external reviewers. That means we'll use a few people from within the foundation, but primarily the team is compiled of external reviewers. We think that's important because that takes out some of the bias of reviewers being familiar with organizations just because they've worked with them in the past through foundation work or other relationships. And so really the stressor is that you are reviewing what is only on paper. You are reviewing what the applicant has put forward to you to review. So that's part of a basic review process anytime, but sometimes having that larger mix of external reviewers helps in that process. When we are dividing out applications, I mentioned that we try and get at least 2 people per application. With the volume that we're looking at here in the past, that typically works out to about 20 to 25 applications per reviewer. And each of those applications will take a reviewer on average, we found, about 1 hour to review. So if you are reviewing 20 applications, that's about 20 hours of time that you would devote to reviewing just that application. That is in addition to the review that will be done around the due diligence components, the finances, and all of the other required components that an application will require. So those components Sunflower will do as well. But the 20 hours is really just looking at the content of how the applicant answered the questions and then how those questions or those responses line up with the rubric and then what the reviewers felt like the score would be for each of those sections. After reviewers have gone through the applications that they've been assigned, in our example here on this slide, we're using 20 applications. So after the full team of reviewers have reviewed all the applications assigned to them, we would then bring the full team of reviewers together for what typically is a 2-day consensus process, where we will then go through each application and the group will look at the 2 scores that were provided to those applications by the 2 reviewers, and the group as a whole will then arrive at 1 consensus score for that particular application. Those applications, after having a consensus score applied to them, move through the final due diligence process where we look at the other wraparound components that were required of the application. Sunflower then develops summaries of each application review, provides that to the board. The board then has, in addition to those summaries, the board will have full access to all and any application that has been received, so you can look at those at any time as well on your own. The important part here, as part of the process that Sunflower is outlining is that Sunflower in this instance does not make any recommendation to fund or not fund. Is all that we would be doing is providing a score based on how reviewers felt those applications lined up against the scoring rubric that you had approved. Those scores then in totality for each application would be provided to you as the board. You are then tasked with going through and determining where the best cutoff points are for what you would fund and what you wouldn't. And some of those considerations will also fall into the things that Krista was talking about in terms of being cognizant of how you divvy up those funds according to congressional districts and some of the other requirements that are outlined in statute. And so I think that we want to stress that last bullet point. What we would be providing you through a review process is strictly how the applications scored according to the rubric that you've approved, according to the reviewers that have been assembled to review those. You would then have the final say in how and when those applications would be funded, how many you choose to fund based on what you're looking at based on the review. I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions on what I've outlined here, on what at least Sunflower has outlined as a potential review process, where most of that review sits with Sunflower and the external reviewers, at least as the starting point.
Any questions for Brandon or Krista? That was a great review, Brandon, and we'll just let you keep going from there.
Great. I'm going to turn it over to Krista now to start looking at the timeline.
All right, thanks, Brandon. So the next slide shows the review process timeline, just an anticipated timeline. Nothing here is set in stone on that next slide there. But this is what we are expecting the timeline to be if we follow this similar process of Sunflower or even any of the other options. It would probably look very similar to this timeline where the bulk of the actual reviews are happening in between June, the May 12th to June 12th-ish window, and then the reviewer consensus meeting. But if you guys chose a different option, those timelines might switch a little bit. Ideally, either way, we'll have summary reports to you all by July 28th, which is 2 weeks before the board meeting where you'd be discussing these applications and all the scores. So that more is more of a hard deadline for us for sure, and as well as the grantee notification since that's in the RFP. Any questions on the timeline?
Looks good, and I know that part of this is just being the first one that we put out there, allowing for adequate time and something unexpected comes up. So I appreciate the timeline that you've laid out. Anyone else with questions or comments about the timeline?
This is Monica. I think it looks really reasonable, and I feel really good about it as far as giving people access, giving Sunflower time to do due diligence, and I think it looks great.
Awesome, thank you. Pat, am I good to go? I can't see
Yep,
anybody,
good
so
to
I'm
go.
guessing. Okay. Thank you for the feedback. And then we did build in extra time for this first process, and then with the next process for the prevention RFP, we've cut it down by about a month's difference. So it's a little bit shorter, but the timeline will look similar. We'll have those windows of opportunity for each of those things still. They just won't be quite as long in all of the timelines. So on the next slide are the three different options that Pat mentioned. So the Sunflower standard process is right there on the left, and then the hybrids in the middle. And then if you all, as the Kansas Fights Addiction Board, wanted to be the reviewers completely. And so what the different breakdowns here, it would all look similar with the process and the things we have to go through, but it would just look different for time commitment and how that consensus meeting happens. I'm assuming if you guys wanted to be the reviewers, we could probably do that during board meetings, but then you'd still have to have the hours to review the application outside of board meetings. And so we just wanted to give you an estimated time commitment for that. So with the hybrid option, if we had Sunflower reviewers and we paid some external reviewers to review a lot more applications than the board did, we think we could probably get you all down to about 10 applications each, which would be at least 10 hours outside of board meetings of a time commitment, if we can get the review consensus meeting into all of our board meetings, if that works out. And then if you all wanted to be the reviewers, Sunflower staff would review more applications, and we could get you down to about 16 or 17 applications each, and that would take you to a 16 to 17 hour time commitment outside of board meetings. And again, anticipating if we get these 113 applications, if it's less, obviously that changes things, or if we get more, that would also change things. But this, just to get an idea of what those time commitments look like. And then, of course, just to note, if we do go with the, you all want to be the reviewers, we'll just have to make sure if we don't get everything done in time, that we'll have to have extra meetings in there to make sure we can announce by September 1. But that could also, I guess, be impacted in any of these options if we don't have enough time to discuss all of the applicants. And with that, I'll open up for questions.
Any questions for Krista in regards to the review process? You know, I know from previous board meetings, we discussed about our involvement as a board. Just myself personally, I certainly think the standard process, realizing that the board does have final say on the awards, and just respecting everybody's time. Very appreciative of each of the board members taking time to serve this important mission. So but not to exclude anyone, if any of the board wanted to be part of the review process, certainly that's open for discussion. But from my opinion, the standard process is one that's been proven over time. Sunflower does a great job, and I prefer choice number one. So with that, any other comments?
This is Jason. I would concur with that. I'll be quite frank about my own competencies around this type of work and reviewing grants and scoring grants, and quite frank, I don't think you want me doing it. So my preference would be to follow that standard process as well.
This is Sarah, and Jason, I'm so glad that you say I concur with that, because that was the exact sentence I was going to use. And so I would agree. Sunflower does a good job. Let's let them continue to do a good job.
Krista, this is Gary. So when we get, and I would agree that option one is the preferred option, can you help me understand what we get, what we will receive from you, so that we can understand the depth? Is it just the scoring metrics, or is also, I see KFAB reviews, reports, and selects. Can you help me understand what that looks like?
Yeah, definitely. So you all will have access to all of the applications before the July 28th. That will be just once we can get all of the process to get those applications for you. So you can see all of the applications, and you'll have access to those way before the 28th deadline. The 28th deadline is when we'll have those summary reports to you. I envision at least a big spreadsheet that has all of the applicants, their scores, a summary of what they were applying for, maybe what priority areas they were applying for, their congressional districts, if they included any of those priority items in their application, and whatnot. So that would probably be a list from highest score to lowest to start. But then Brandon and I will also brainstorm different ways to look at the data. And so say like the 30 highest scores are all in the same congressional districts. We'll, highlight different pieces like that of how, things you'll need to consider when you're making decisions. Those kind of things, just different way to look at the data. But you will get those full summaries for sure, and then we'll see what will make the most sense to break down different kind of reports to look at the information in a different way. And then you'll also have those access to all of the applications. So that's what we're thinking. I don't know exactly what those other data kind of reports will look like yet, based on the responses we get. But different ways to look at it for sure.
I think that I was just trying to assess, we have a fiduciary obligation towards the Capitol, and we have a responsibility in regard to that capital, if we outsource all that to you in regard to the scoring systems and the matrices, which makes sense to me, are we going to be able to fulfill our fiduciary obligation with enough data? And it sounds to me like we will, to be able to assess whether A is better than B or C is better than D. It feels like that to me.
Okay, and also since you guys will get it on the 28th, if you feel like you need to see something different before the meeting, or maybe it comes up during our meeting and you guys want more additional information or ways to look at it broken down, we could also do that and maybe have a smaller in-between interim meeting if we had to have another one before that September 1 date. But we could also do that if it's not enough information, whatever we come up with. Hopefully it will be, but you never know.
Gary, this is Brandon. Great questions. I think in addition to what, Krista added, I think that's certainly why the rubric is important and why it was important for the board to go through that and to approve that, so that in essence you are approving the standards and measures that a review committee would be using to look at and score these applications. In other words, these are the things that we as a board thought are important, and this is what we want you to particularly look for and score for. Those reports will also include things like what the potential strengths and weaknesses were based on that scoring rubric, so that you can see those. But then also, as Krista said, you'll have access to the full application so that you can go through those applications yourself and say, oh, give me a little bit more detail here on why this was necessarily a weakness or why this was a strength. Because as I read it, this is what it's looking like. So let's have a conversation about it. So that final process of the board arriving at those cutoff points should involve some pretty good conversation among board members and us in terms of what you're seeing as you look at the applications, what you're seeing as you look at the applications in comparison to the summary reviews and to some of the other components that you'll have in front of you to consider as well. So hopefully, I think we'll be learning as we go through this as what the full package will look like to make sure the board has, as you said, all of that information to make the selections that they want to make based on the data that they have.
Great. And I have just a follow-up question. You have in option 1, 9 external reviewers. Those people do not work for Sunflower, I assume.
Correct.
Okay, and so then, what are the qualifications of those reviewers? And then do we have to make a capital commitment from the fund to pay for those reviewers? How does that work?
I'll speak to the qualification of the reviewers. I started reaching out to some already that I know have expertise in these areas that are not applying, so they don't have any kind of conflict. And so some of them will be paid, but then I also envision some of them will not be paid because some are federal employees or maybe state employees like KDAD's employees. KDAD's isn't applying, so I reached out to them to invite them. None of them have agreed yet, but I told them pending approval. I just didn't want I didn't want to wait until the last minute to start reaching out to find reviewers. So we started it saying we might need you kind of language. And so we have some of those, and some will be paid and some wouldn't need to be paid since they are state or federal employees. And I don't know, it would be I believe a Sunflower expense. It would fall under our category. Does that make sense, Robert?
Yeah, that would make sense. And if we needed to deal with additional funding to take care of that, that's something that can be brought before the board. I also want to say I really appreciate the concern about, fulfilling your fiduciary duties. Sunflower is going to provide really good information, and there will be specific statutory factors the board has to consider when making grant awards. So a lot of that is baked into the rubric, but you'll have those at your disposal too at the first meeting where you're deciding these. That will make sure that you all are absolutely doing the right thing by statute and fulfilling all your statutory and fiduciary obligations.
And thank you for that, Robert. I guess where my mind was going is that if we need to make a capital commitment from the fund to pay for 9 external reviewers to make sure that we get the right ones that are really qualified, I would be totally in favor of doing something like that.
If that's something that ends up having to happen, we can bring that to the board.
Yeah, we'll rely upon Sunflower to judge if we need an extra allocation for reviewers. Very good. Any other questions or comments for Krista or Brandon? Thank you. Thanks for those questions, Gary. And, we are ready to move on to number 5, I believe. Krista or Brandon, any final comments in regards?
Not in particular, other than if there's something specifically that you want us to make sure we include in those summary reports, if there's something specific you want to make sure we don't forget, or we do include a way of looking at it, just let us know. We can do that as well.
Okay.
And Pat, do we need a motion on one of these 3 options?
I think Robert said we did not.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So I missed that.
No, that's okay. You've previously empowered Sunflower to develop this RFP process, so no additional votes needed.
Very good. Well, we will move on to item number 5. The next RFP that we'll put out, Sunflower's been developing it. So, Krista, Brandon?
Yep, that's me again. All right, so we don't have slides for this one, but we can just walk through the draft document that you all received. It looks just like the treatment RFP, but wherever we had treatment references, we changed to prevention. We changed the total available funding to the $2 million. Little technical changes like that were made. And then, of course, the timelines were revised based on the release and when those things would happen. So the basic kind of technical changes. And then on page 3 is where the strategies start. So this is the same list that you all have seen before and that you sent revisions on. And we just need to I want to make sure run those by you so you guys can get them approved before we finalize this. And I will note that under providers and health systems on page 4, the highlighted one, it used to say something related to increasing data waivers, and since those are not required anymore, since that changed federally, I just changed the language a little bit since that wasn't relevant anymore. So that one's highlighted because I changed that just based on that information. The red text or input that you guys have provided in those former meetings. So do you have any questions or discussions to approve these strategies?
Any questions? Comments? The only comment I have is I'm just very impressed with the diligence and the effort that you put forth to prepare both the first RFP and then the second one. Obviously, it's not your first rodeo, and I think we'll get good results from having a good start with the RFP, and I assume, as you said, that there are some things that you included in the second one that you've learned from the first one, just kind of more Q&A that came up.
Yeah, I'll go to those when we get to those next pages. I'll make sure and go over those with all of you too.
Okay.
This is Monica. I think it looks really great, and I think it's a really nice application for people to completely understand what they're applying for and how to do it. And as somebody who does that work, I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you. Robert, do you think we need a motion to approve the strategies in here?
I think we approved the last one by motion, so we should do it to be consistent.
Okay. Just the strategies, at least. The full RFP, there are other revisions still that we'll go for. I just want to make sure the strategies are what you guys want.
Okay. So I will entertain a motion to approve the strategies.
This is Jason. So moved.
This is Sandra. I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye.
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 Same sign for non-approval? All right, unanimous. Thank you. Krista, you may proceed.
Awesome. Thanks all. So then on page 5, this is mostly just deadline information and different links that were revised. So again, this one opens May 8th, and then we'd have a confirmation of intent due May 31st. And of course, we'll change all of those links out once this is approved, and it will go out with the links at that point. And then we have it closing on June 23rd. So that were those deadlines there. The one link that is in here is just a technical assistance guide, so it's not like a direct link. People can already access it on our website, so we left that one on there. On page 6, again, those are just timeline changes. We're anticipating that awards would be made on or before October 2nd, so a month shorter time frame than we had for the treatment RFP, and hopefully will align nicely with board meetings, and we won't be too far behind with getting the prevention grantees started after the treatment grantees have started. So we're aiming for a close start date there. Chris is going to say something?
Yeah, Chris, I just had a question on that. Are the timelines, so we would be doing any kind of work on this RFP in the September meeting? Okay, and then we would make the announcements and then have the October meeting. That just making sure that timeline works.
Correct,
Okay.
yeah. So August meeting would be focused on the treatment grantees. September meeting would be focused on these prevention grantees, yes. So those would be long meetings. And then on page 8, the change is other relevant sections. So we primarily were just calling out 501c3s on the last RFP, and we've had a lot of questions about other types of nonprofits. And so we added some language so that it is a little bit more open, and it's not just looking like it's limited to only 501c3s. So that's that highlight on page 8. And then on page 10, we also have similar language that we added in, so it didn't look like it was just 501c3s. So we added a section for nonprofits that may not have a 990 and what we would require from them for their documentation so that we can do the appropriate checks that we would have. And so those are those pieces there under organizational documents. And then we also added the highlights in the notes section about additional documents that we might require. We won't require from everybody, but might have to be requested from certain entities if we need additional information. So we added that in there. These are the lessons learned kind of things that Pat was talking about. And then on 11, the first highlight, make sure you save often. We keep that highlighted so that the applicants know, and they keep doing that in the system, so those highlights will stay. And then on the second highlight on that page, we put in a note about the priority piece. So we didn't have anything that outlined how we were going to measure that we'd give priority to applicants. So we have that section about applicants' priority if they are, of course, meeting the things that are required by statute. And a lot of those are already a component of the application, but the things that were not a component of the application questions, we added to the review form just a question at the end that said, did they, let me see, I'll go back to that page. I think it's on page, should have wrote that down. I think priority pieces, where are you? On page 8. So the applicants demonstrating the following will be given priority in the selection process. So those that are not otherwise seeking or receiving funds from opioid litigation is the first one, which is by statute, expanding the availability of certified drug abuse treatment programs authorized by that statute. Also in our statute, science and data driven and new and innovative approaches. Which are, I think both of those are in the statute as well. Science and data driven is for sure. And then also adding that priority of the applications that are serving those counties that are at highest risk as identified by KDHE, and then applications that also include strategies to address those overarching areas that were in the state plan that touch all of the priority areas of like stigma and data and surveillance, policy issues, workforce development, all of those things. And so since most of these pieces are already components of the application, we didn't have anything on, I believe the second bullet about expanding certified drug abuse treatment, and then providing services in one or more of the 21 counties, or the strategies to address the following that were in that state plan. So those 3 bullet points have a question at the end of the review form. It's just yes or no. Are they proposing that or not? That the reviewer can check a box, and that way we can also present that in the spreadsheet to you for the review process of a check mark. Yes, they have this priority item, and et cetera, so that you guys can consider that when you're reviewing scores and applicants and making decisions. And so we added also language on page 11 where we talk about the grant review. So we're just being more transparent and we're calling it out again so that people know, since we didn't do that last time, we hadn't thought about it. And then the next question, or the next changes are not until, there's a change on 14, which is just the deadline change. And then the frequently asked questions from 11 on are new. So those were frequently asked questions that we added based on questions we've gotten from this first round and that are on the Sunflower website. So we just went ahead and lumped those in here so that all of them are also in this second RFP. And I think that is all the changes that are, that's what's different from the treatment RFP to the prevention RFP.
Thank you, Krista. Questions for Krista? Lots of work there. Very much appreciate you incorporating, things that we've learned from the first RFP into the second one. That should streamline it even more. Seeing no questions, I guess looking at Robert, we approve the first RFP, and so I assume that we need to take action and approve the second RFP.
I agree.
So I will entertain a motion for approving the second RFP that was just presented.
This is Robin, move to approve.
Sarah Keeler will second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign. Unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Krista, for the information and for getting that out to us ahead of time. Very much appreciate that. We will move on to number 6, which is just an update on the needs assessment. I know a lot of work behind the scenes have been going on, and I look this needs assessment that will guide us over the next few years. So, Krista, turn it over to you.
Awesome, thanks. And I forgot to mention, we'll do the same kind of communications plan. At least I'll send the emails out and stuff like that, and we'll figure out what kind of press releases Attorney General's office might be interested in. But we'll figure out the communications so that we spread the word the same way we did the first time. So on the needs assessment, so we've gotten a lot of different input from different organizations. We, of course, started with you all, and then we had the state agencies, the Department of Corrections, KDADS, KDHE, and a little bit from the insurance department. And we've also since received input from SAMHSA, the Kansas Prescription Drug and Opioid Advisory Committee, Midwest HIDA and the CDC Foundation, the Kansas Recovery Network, CKF Addictions Treatment, Mirror, Valley Hope, and Greenbush. A lot of these different folks, I was wanting to get specific expertise on the different areas. So we've received input from them, and I've integrated those feedback into the needs assessment framework document that is massive. And so we had 2 partners that offered to assist in obtaining a lived experience panel for review, but both of those fell through. So we have some of the folks that gave feedback that also have some lived experience, but didn't have a specific lived experience panel to review and provide feedback yet. We're looking at maybe trying to see if maybe the KDAD's peer leadership subcommittee might be able to provide some feedback, but they are just getting started. They're starting to build their, developing their structure and their charter and whatnot. So I'm not sure if they're at a point to actually give us feedback or not, but that might be another way to get additional lived experience into the RFP process. And but I intend to for sure make sure that lived experience is involved throughout the process as well when the needs assessment actually starts occurring. But getting that feedback now also, I'm still working on getting additional feedback there. But what I'm doing now is trying to format the content from that framework document into an RFP sort of layout that won't be too intimidating for people to hopefully express interest and have a proposal to us. And so we're looking at what that will look like and a timeline associated with that, and we'll keep you updated as that goes forward. And I'm hoping that this process, since we're anticipating it will take at least a year, that I'm hoping we can get this process aligned with our grantee process so that ideally the needs assessment is wrapping up around the same time that our grantees are as well, so that hopefully that will help guide the next round of funding so we have a seamless transition in an ideal world. So that's my goal. Any questions on needs assessment progress?
Seeing none, just a comment that, as I mentioned, that really looking forward to getting this out there. And I know it's taken some time, but to me, this is this document will guide us over the next years and hopefully guide us to making a difference with the funds that are afforded to us. So I like the work that Sunflower has done so far, but also encourage any of the board members, if you have any thoughts or ideas as it comes to the needs assessment. Of course, we'll have time to weigh in, but to certainly send that information on to Krista in the meantime. Okay, no comments, questions in regards to the needs assessment. Krista, any final thoughts or?
Nope, that's all I had. Thanks.
Okay. Well, we've come to the end of the meeting here. The next meeting is scheduled for May 12th, same times. As I mentioned, we'll develop the agenda if we don't need to be there in person. Obviously, we'll let that be known as well, but you're always welcome to be there in person. And as we move on in this process, I see us more and more having that need, but it's nice having this option of WebEx. Apologize again at the beginning for our technical difficulties, but we figured it out and we all got on board here. So thank you. Any comments from staff before we close out the meeting?
Pat, just one thing, since we had a handful of other board members join, since I asked, if all board members can send us those bios. I know one person has also sent another bio already, but if you can't send us those bios as soon as possible, that would be appreciated.
And that's just a short, like a 1-paragraph bio that they can put on our website.
Yes.
Well, you all have a good day. And with that being said, thank you, Brandon and Krista, again, for all your work and all the other folks at Sunflower. Please relay that same message. Thanks to the board for joining. Thanks for the AG office, and a big thank you to the IT. I think that's Jacob that got us all connected here somehow, some way. So I appreciate that. With that, I will adjourn the meeting.